In King David's time in Jerusalem, one night changed the course of the palace. While the army was fighting far away, David stayed in the city and from his balcony saw a woman bathing. It was Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah, one of his most loyal soldiers. The look turned into desire, the desire into an order, and she was brought to the king. From that encounter came a secret that was hard to hide. To cover up his mistake, David sent Uriah to the front lines of the battle, where he would not return from. But the God of Israel doesn't overlook what happens, not even among kings. The prophet Nathan came and revealed the sin, and David's household reaped pain and discipline. Still, from the same woman involved in the scandal came Solomon, a sign that grace can rewrite stories and keep the promise alive. That's how we understand that even human failures don't cancel out God's purpose. If you want to keep exploring passages like this and learn from them, subscribe to the channel and share the video. From the palace terrace, David was looking out over Jerusalem when his eyes met those of a woman bathing in the distance. It was Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah, one of the king's most loyal soldiers. In that moment, a silent desire overcame David's sense of prudence. Even surrounded by women and honors, he ordered that she be brought to the palace. The encounter, marked by fascination and the breaking of boundaries, turned into adultery. And it didn't end with just one act. A short time later, Bathsheba told him she was pregnant, and what had started as an impulse became a threat to the king's image. David, who was supposed to be an example of faithfulness to God's law, found himself trapped by his own mistake. To avoid scandal and hide his wrongdoing, he began to scheme for solutions, revealing the contrast between the righteous leader he was called to be and the vulnerable man who gave in to temptation. His attempt to control the consequences showed that the sin didn't end with the act. It deepened with every decision. The episode reveals not only a king's passion, but the weight of betraying his people's trust and disrespecting God himself. That was the beginning of a chain of dark choices. To avoid exposing his affair with Bathsheba, David first chose a quiet, discreet approach. He sent for Uriah, who was on the battlefield, thinking that once he came home he would go to his wife. If that happened, everyone would assume the pregnancy was the result of her husband's visit, and the matter would end there. But Uriah had a different sense of honor. While the soldiers of Israel were sleeping in the open and risking their lives, he refused to enjoy any kind of comfort. He stayed in the palace quarters near the guards and didn't go into his house. His refusal ruined David's plan and made the risk of everything being discovered even greater. Pressured by his own mistake, the king gave up on subtlety and made a harsh decision. He sent Uriah back to war with clear instructions to place him at the most dangerous spot, and also ordered the others to pull back at the right moment, leaving him exposed to the enemy's attack. That way, the problem would be taken care of on the battlefield, and the appearance of normalcy would be preserved before the people, as if it were just another loss of war. Cold, necessary, and the direct result of his own choice. David didn't just fall into adultery. He decided to eliminate the man who stood in the way of keeping his secret. Uriah, Bathsheba's loyal husband and a faithful soldier, was placed on the front lines to die, not because of the war, but so the king's sin would disappear with him. That act marked one of the darkest moments in David's life. But David's hiding place didn't go unnoticed by God. The child conceived from that relationship became seriously ill, and the king threw himself into fasting and prayer, hoping the Lord would reverse his judgment. For 7 days he pleaded, but the baby died. Even so, the story didn't end in failure. God, in his sovereign decision, allowed David and Bathsheba to have another son, and the prophet Nathan announced that his name would be Solomon, a name that carries the idea of peace and showed that God still intended to write something through that family. That birth didn't erase the earlier sin, but it showed that the Lord could bring purpose even after judgment, and that the throne of Israel would continue through that boy. From then on, David would have to live knowing that God saw everything, and that authority didn't mean permission to act without accountability. The name pointed to a guarantee from God. Even after sin and the brokenness of the past, David's family would not be cast aside. God had chosen this king and made a covenant with him that wasn't just for his lifetime, but for the generations to come. David, known for his heart devoted to the Lord and for the victories he led, wanted to build a temple to honor God's presence. But the Lord sent the prophet Nathan with a surprising message. Before David built something for God, God would build something for David. The promise was this: one of his descendants would sit on the throne, the kingdom would be established, and the Lord would care for that house like a father cares for his son. Even when discipline was needed because of sin, mercy would not be taken away as it had been with Saul. So God declared that David's house, kingdom, and throne would stand before him forever, a sign that his purpose would continue. This covenant showed that Israel's story wouldn't depend only on human strength, but on God's own faithfulness. He was saying that despite the failures, he would keep the promise of peace, rule, and presence alive. That's why when the text speaks of an everlasting kingdom, it points to something greater than an earthly throne. It points to the unfolding of God's will in history through the house of David. The story reveals something crucial. When mistakes are faced without masks, the path to forgiveness opens up. David admits his own guilt and turns to God seeking mercy. From the depth of that return comes Psalm 51, where every verse exposes the wound and asks for restoration. It's not an automatic ritual, it's an encounter with truth, and that's what makes it transformative. God's response doesn't erase the consequences, but it opens a new possibility: to start over. That new beginning appears with the birth of Solomon. After grief and shame, David's household breathes change, and the story that once seemed broken takes a new direction. The boy who would one day reign becomes a sign that grace never gives up on the future. Bathsheba's place, once marked by pain and suspicion, now stands at the center of the monarchy, and her motherhood carries promises for the kingdom. Over time, though, David's strength fades. His body can no longer keep up with the memory of his victories, and his authority begins to slip through the palace halls. Weakened, he watches as disputes, alliances, and voices rise to test the limits of the throne. In that tense moment, the question returns: what holds a kingdom together when the king's strength fades? And what loyalty remains when power begins to give way? In the midst of the kingdom's fragility, Adonijah, one of David's sons, saw an opportunity to get ahead of the old king's decision. Convinced that he was the natural heir, he sought support from influential officials, won over favorable priests, and prepared a grand banquet to present himself as king before his guests. This move wasn't just about vanity. It opened a dangerous dispute and threatened the stability David had built over years of rule. In that situation, Bathsheba remembered the promise that Solomon, her son, would be the successor chosen by God, and she decided to act. She went before David and told him about Adonijah's actions, showing that if nothing was done, the kingdom would fall into conflict. Nathan the prophet confirmed her words and reinforced that God's will pointed to Solomon. David then responded firmly. He ordered Solomon to be anointed before the people, proclaimed him king, and put an end to Adonijah's scheme. In this way, the Davidic dynasty remained intact, and Israel moved into a time of peace, order, and growth under the new king's rule. Known for his wisdom, the temple in Jerusalem, and the alliances and trade that increased the nation's prestige. Solomon's story shows that God directs history and can even use serious mistakes to fulfill his purposes. Before him, the story of David and Bathsheba revealed the weight of sin and the value of turning back. David tried to hide the adultery and the death of Uriah. But the Lord sent the prophet Nathan to confront him and lead him to true repentance. He was forgiven, but he still faced serious consequences, like the death of his first son with Bathsheba, reminding us that God is just and doesn't treat sin lightly. At the same time, that same family experienced divine grace when Solomon was born, a sign that God restores those who humble themselves and seek a new beginning. This shows us a balanced truth. God disciplines, but he also welcomes. He corrects, but never abandons those who turn back to him. So the Bible teaches that guilt doesn't have to be the end of the story. There's forgiveness, reconciliation, and a new chapter for anyone who comes to the Lord with a sincere heart. If this message spoke to you, support our work. Subscribe to the channel, leave a comment with your thoughts, and tell us which topics you'd like to see in the next YouTube video. May this word renew your faith and remind you that God still writes better endings for those who surrender to him.